The porcelain shattered against the flagstones, and for one suspended second, no one in Ashmere Hall's drawing-room breathed. Lady Eleanor Whitmore stood frozen, the empty silver tray trembling in her hands, tea soaking into the antique rug like spilled blood. She had served this household for 3 years without a single complaint against her name. She had nursed the old Duchess through her final winter. She had memorized every crack in every floorboard so she'd never again wake the master with her footsteps. And now, over one dropped cup, Duke Gerald Ashford was looking at her as though she were a stranger who'd broken into his home. "Serve the tea," he said, his voice low and terrible, "then leave forever." The words landed like a slap. Eleanor's chin lifted, some last shred of pride refusing to let him see her crumble. "Your Grace. I said leave." He did not look at her. He stared instead at the cold hearth, jaw tight, hands clenched behind his back like a man holding himself together by force alone. "Tonight. I don't want to see your face in this house again." She left without another word, because that was what 3 years of service had taught her: swallow it, curtsy, go. She did not see the letter half hidden beneath his ledger on the side table. She did not see Lord Pembroke watching from the doorway, satisfaction flickering behind his polite, mournful expression. And Duke Ashford did not yet know that within hours, he would tear the house apart searching for a woman he'd just thrown into a Cornwall storm, nor that the tea, the anger, and the letter had all been arranged by someone standing far closer to him than he could ever have suspected. What secret was worth destroying an innocent woman's life to protect? Eleanor walked the long gravel drive of Ashmere Hall with nothing but a small case and the clothes on her back, rain beginning to needle down from a bruised Cornwall sky. Behind her, candlelight glowed in windows she'd polished 100 times. Ahead of her lay nothing but the coastal road, 3 miles to the nearest village, and a night that promised to be brutal. She did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears solved nothing, especially not for a woman without family, without fortune, without a name that opened doors. She had come to Ashmere as a girl of 20 with references and a hunger to matter somewhere. She was leaving as a woman of 23 with nothing but the humiliation of being dismissed like a stray dog over spilled tea. Inside the hall, Clara Hastings found the Duke exactly where she expected, alone in his study, a glass of brandy untouched at his elbow, staring at nothing. "You sent her out in this weather?" Clara didn't bother with pleasantries. She had known Gerald since they were children racing ponies along these cliffs, and she'd buried patience for his temper years ago. "She broke the Sèvres cup," Gerald said flatly, as though that explained everything. "That cup survived your grandmother's season. I don't think it minds one more crack." Clara crossed her arms. "Something's wrong with you, Gerald. You haven't been yourself since the accounts came back short." His head lifted sharply. "How do you know about the accounts?" "Because Lord Pembroke mentioned it at supper last week, quite casually, as though he weren't the one managing your ledgers." Clara's eyes narrowed. "Where is that letter you were reading, the one you shoved under your book the moment I walked in?" Gerald's hand moved instinctively toward the ledger, and beneath it, the folded paper he hadn't meant for anyone to see. His fingers hesitated. Something about the housekeeper's face when she'd looked at that tray, not fear, not even hurt, but a flicker of something like knowing, nagged at him now that the anger had drained away. He hadn't dismissed her over a teacup. He'd dismissed her because for one unguarded moment, she had glanced toward his desk exactly where the letter lay, and something in her expression had made him feel exposed, as if she'd already understood things he barely understood himself. Outside, thunder rolled over the moor. "Gerald." Clara's voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. "What was in that letter?" He didn't answer. He was already thinking of Eleanor walking alone in the storm, and for the first time all evening, the anger in his chest had curdled into something far more uncomfortable, the first cold edge of regret. Lord Pembroke poured himself a second glass of the Duke's finest port, savoring the quiet triumph settling in his chest. From the drawing-room window, he'd watched the housekeeper's small figure disappear down the drive, swallowed by rain and dusk, and something in him had finally exhaled. 3 years he'd managed Ashmere's accounts. 3 years of careful, patient theft, a false invoice here, an inflated repair there, tenant rents that never quite matched what he reported to Gerald. It had been simple enough when the old Duke was ill and the young one too grieved to look closely at ledgers. But Eleanor Whitmore had a housekeeper's eye for detail that no amount of charm could distract. She'd found discrepancies in the household accounts months ago, small things, in themselves meaningless, until stitched together they formed a pattern only a fool could ignore. He'd known she was gathering proof. He hadn't known how much, until he'd intercepted the letter she'd written to Gerald's solicitor in London, sealed and ready to post. It sat now in Pembroke's coat pocket, damning enough to end him. Getting rid of her had needed to look accidental. Gerald's temper was well known, and a spilled cup, timed just as the Duke was already raw from reading the very letter Pembroke had planted for him to find, a forged note suggesting Eleanor had been selling household secrets to a rival family, had been almost too easy to arrange. He did not know that a housekeeper never leaves a great house with empty hands, and Eleanor's small case held something more valuable than any silver. Back in the study, Gerald finally pulled the letter free of the ledger and read it again, more carefully this time. His stomach turned. The handwriting, which he'd taken at first glance for Eleanor's careful script, now looked subtly wrong, the loops too deliberate, the ink too fresh in places where age should have faded it. Clara. His voice had changed. Look at this. She took the paper, studied it, and her frown deepened. This isn't her hand. I've seen her ledger entries for years, this is close, but it's not the same. Then who? A knock interrupted them. The under-butler, young Simmons, hovered nervously in the doorway. Your Grace, forgive me. Mrs. Whitmore left this behind, in the linen cupboard where she kept her account books. I thought, given the hour, you should see it before it was lost. He held out a small, worn ledger of Eleanor's own keeping, along with several loose papers tucked inside. Gerald opened it with unsteady hands. Column after column of Pembroke's forged entries, cross-referenced against real receipts Eleanor had somehow obtained, dates, sums, names of tenants who'd been overcharged and never reimbursed. The full shape of it rose before him like a wave about to break. Dear God, he whispered. What have I done? Outside, the storm had not lessened, and somewhere on the coastal road, a woman he'd wronged was walking through it alone, carrying, without even knowing it, the only proof that could save his house and ruin the man who'd betrayed them both. Gerald was already pulling his greatcoat from its hook when Clara caught his arm. You can't ride out in this alone, not at this hour, not in this state. I sent her into a storm over a lie I didn't even question, he said, his voice rough. I'm not waiting until morning to make it right. He rode hard along the coastal road, rain lashing sideways off the cliffs, lightning throwing the landscape into stark white relief every few seconds. He passed the turning to the village, the old mill, the churchyard where his mother was buried, and found no sign of her anywhere. Panic, unfamiliar and unwelcome, began to claw at his chest. What if she'd taken the cliff path instead, the shorter but far more dangerous route down toward the cove? What if she'd already reached the village and boarded some coach south, gone forever, taking with her the only proof that could unmask Pembroke? He found her nearly a mile further on, sheltering beneath the meager overhang of an old shepherd's hut, soaked through, shivering, her case clutched against her chest like the only thing left in the world worth protecting. She looked up as his horse approached, and there was no relief in her expression, only a wary, exhausted defiance. Have you come to finish dismissing me properly, Your Grace? I believe you forgot to withhold my final wages. Eleanor, her name came out cracked, unfamiliar on his tongue after months of calling her only Mrs. Whitmore, with careful, correct distance. I read the ledger. Simmons brought it to me. I know the letter was forged. I know it was never you. Something in her face shifted, not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest crack in her armor. Then you know what Lord Pembroke has been doing. I know enough to be ashamed of every word I said to you tonight. He dismounted, closing the distance between them slowly, as though she were something that might startle and run. I was already furious before you ever walked into that room. I'd found a letter suggesting you'd betrayed us, sold secrets to a rival family. I didn't stop to ask myself why the hand looked wrong, why the timing was so convenient. I let my anger decide before my reason ever had the chance. That was the moment everything changed. Eleanor studied him for a long moment, rain dripping from her lashes, and then, quietly, I've been gathering proof against Lord Pembroke for 4 months. Every ledger discrepancy, every falsified receipt. I wrote to your solicitor in London, the letter should have reached him by now, unless it was intercepted. Gerald's blood went cold. If Pembroke has eyes in this house, he may already know you've been discovered. He may already be trying to destroy what's left of the evidence, or worse, trying to leave before anyone can stop him. He held out his hand, not as a duke to a servant, but as a man who had wronged someone and knew it. Come back to Ashmere. Not as my housekeeper. As the one person who can help me save what's left of my family's honor. Please. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, rain still falling between them, before finally placing her cold fingers in his. The ride back to Ashmere Hall was silent, both of them soaked and shivering, Eleanor seated before him on the horse with his coat draped over her shoulders, a small, insufficient gesture against everything he owed her. Neither spoke. The storm had eased to a steady, miserable drizzle, but the tension between them remained thick as the mist rolling off the moor. When they reached the house, Clara was waiting at the door, relief flooding her face at the sight of them both alive and upright. But the relief didn't last. Pembroke's gone, she said. I went to fetch him the moment you rode out, thought he should know what Simmons found. His rooms are empty. His horse is missing from the stables. Gerald's jaw tightened. He knows we've found him out. There's worse. Clara's voice dropped. Simmons says he saw Pembroke's man riding toward the coast road not an hour ago, carrying a strongbox from the estate office. If that's the original account books, the true ones, not the ledgers Eleanor copied from. Then he means to destroy every piece of evidence that isn't already in Eleanor's hands, Gerald finished grimly. Eleanor, still wrapped in his coat, spoke with quiet steel. My ledger has copies, but copies can be dismissed as forgery just as easily as his letter was meant to condemn me. Without the original account books, it's my word against his, and I am a housekeeper, your grace. No court will take my word over a lord's. The unfairness of it struck Gerald like a physical blow. 3 years of loyal service, 4 months of quiet, dangerous work to protect a house that wasn't even hers, and she would still be disbelieved simply for who she was. Then it will be my word beside yours, he said. I'll stand in front of every magistrate in Cornwall if I have to. But first we need those books before Pembroke destroys them or disappears with them entirely. There's an old smuggler's path down through the cove, Eleanor said suddenly. The coast road loops around by the cliffs. If he's riding for a ship at the harbor, he'll have to pass the cove first. It's the fastest way down, if you know it. I found it while walking the grounds last autumn. Gerald stared at her, something fierce and unfamiliar rising in his chest, not just urgency, but a fierce, aching respect. This woman he'd thrown out into a storm over a shattered teacup had spent months protecting his family from ruin while he'd been too blind, too grieved, too quick to anger to notice what was happening beneath his own roof. Show me, he said. I'm coming with you, Eleanor answered, already moving toward the door despite her soaked skirts and trembling hands. You've been through enough tonight. And I intend to see this finished. Her eyes met his, unflinching. This is my fight as much as yours, your grace. Perhaps more. He didn't argue further. Clara pressed a loaded pistol into his hand and called for 2 grooms to follow on horseback, her face pale with worry she didn't bother hiding. Outside, the rain had begun to lift, but the night was far from over, and somewhere along the darkened cliffs, Lord Pembroke was already nearing the cove, the last proof of his crimes locked in a strongbox he had no intention of letting anyone recover. The smuggler's path was treacherous even in daylight, a narrow ribbon of packed earth clinging to the cliff face above a sea churned white with the storm's last fury. Eleanor led the way with sure, practice steps, Gerald close behind, the grooms following with lanterns that guttered uselessly in the wind. They reached the cove just as Lord Pembroke's man was loading the strongbox into a small boat drawn up on the shingle, a larger vessel waiting further out in the dark water beyond the breakers. Pembroke. Gerald's voice cut through the wind and rain. The man turned, and for a moment something like genuine surprise crossed his face, quickly smoothed into the same practiced calm he'd worn at 100 dinners, 100 pleasant conversations while quietly bleeding the estate dry. Gerald. I confess I didn't expect you to follow so quickly. His eyes flicked to Eleanor, and his mouth curled with something cold. Nor did I expect Mrs. Whitmore to survive the night. How resourceful of her. It's over, Pembroke. I've seen the ledgers. I know what you've done. You've seen a housekeeper's copies, Pembroke said smoothly, gesturing toward the strongbox already half loaded into the boat. Copies that will mean nothing once the originals are at the bottom of the channel. And without originals, what do you have, Gerald? The word of a servant you dismissed for theft not 6 hours ago, against a peer of the realm who has managed your affairs faithfully for 3 years. He smiled, and it was the smile of a man who believed he'd already won. Everyone in the county already knows you sacked her tonight. It will look like nothing more than a woman's desperate revenge. The truth of it landed like a physical blow. Gerald's own fury, his own rash cruelty hours earlier, had built Pembroke's defense for him. Every servant in the house had heard the Duke's raised voice, seen Eleanor cast out into the storm. Who would believe her word now, against a lord's, with the very evidence about to vanish into the sea? Push off. Pembroke barked to his man, and the boat began sliding toward the waves, the strongbox rocking dangerously with each surge of water. Gerald raised the pistol Clara had given him, hands trembling, not from fear, but from the crushing weight of what he stood to lose. One shot, in this dark, this wind, this rain, might miss entirely. Might strike the strongbox and send the only proof to the bottom of the channel regardless. Gerald, don't. Eleanor's hand caught his arm. If you damage the box, we lose everything either way. The boat was 10 feet from shore now. 15. The larger vessel's lanterns bobbed in the darkness beyond, patient, waiting. For one terrible moment, watching the evidence of Pembroke's crime slip away into black water, Gerald understood with sickening clarity that his temper had cost them everything, not just Eleanor's trust, not just one night's cruelty, but the very proof that could have saved his family's name and hers. There seemed no way left to stop it. Then Simmons and the grooms burst onto the shingle behind them, having taken the upper cliff road at a gallop. Pembroke's man, seeing armed reinforcements, abandoned the oars in panic, and the boat swung broadside into a breaker, spilling the strongbox into the shallows where it could be recovered, soaked but intact. Pembroke was arrested within the week. The recovered ledgers, matched precisely to Eleanor's careful copies, left no room for doubt. The magistrate praised her diligence publicly, undoing in one afternoon what a single cruel sentence had nearly destroyed. Gerald knelt before the county, and before Eleanor, admitting his temper had almost cost them everything. She forgave him slowly, deliberately, and when he asked her to stay not as housekeeper but as duchess, she finally smiled. Ashmere Hall was saved. So was his heart. Do you think he made the right choice?